In the quiet suburbs of the late 1980s, a young mother found herself ensnared in a nightmare that would haunt her for years to come. She was in her early 30s, raising two small children, a 3-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son. While her husband worked long hours to make ends meet, life had been challenging. But what began as a series of anonymous phone calls soon spiraled into something far more sinister. Every morning, like clockwork, the phone would ring. On the other end was a man whose voice dripped with malice. He described in chilling detail the depraved acts he wished to inflict upon her. Sometimes he would recount exactly what she was wearing, other times what she was doing at that very moment, as though he were watching her through unseen eyes. The young mother was paralyzed with fear, unable to escape the suffocating grip of her tormentor. Moving was out of the question. Financial struggles kept the family tethered to their modest home. Desperate for safety, she began spending her days at her mother-in-law's house, seeking refuge while her husband was away. The police were called, but the technology of the time offered little hope of tracing the calls. The stalker remained a shadowy figure, lurking just beyond reach. Years passed, and the family finally managed to save enough money to move. They changed their phone number, ensuring it was unlisted, a small but vital precaution in an era dominated by landlines. The call stopped, but the terror lingered. Night after night, the mother woke from nightmares, trembling and sobbing into her pillow. Her children, too young to understand, could only watch helplessly as she struggled to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Then one day, the police delivered news that sent shivers down their spines. The stalker had been caught. He was none other than the 19-year-old son of their next-door neighbor. A young man discharged from the military due to severe mental illness. In his room, investigators discovered a box filled with candid photographs of the mother, taken without her knowledge. Images of her tending to the garden, playing with her children in the yard. Moments of innocence turned into objects of obsession. The young man was placed in a secure facility specializing in mental health care, but the damage had already been done. The family's sense of safety had been shattered, replaced by an enduring unease. Even now, decades later, the memory of those years casts a long shadow. The thought of what could have happened during those vulnerable moments chills the daughter to her core. She was far too young to protect her mother then, but the story remains etched in her mind. A haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk just beyond the veil of ordinary life. The journey from the Yucatan to Chiapas was meant to be just another long bus ride, a grueling 15-hour trek through the heart of Mexico. It was late at night when the bus pulled into a dimly lit gas station. Passengers disembarked to stretch their legs, grab some snacks, and use the facilities. The air was heavy with the scent of diesel and the faint hum of insects. At first glance, it seemed like any other stop, but something felt off. There were far too many police officers lingering in the shadows, and their presence became unsettling. When the passengers returned to their seats, the driver delivered news that sent a ripple of unease throughout the bus. The police had received a tip-off. Their bus was the target of a planned robbery by a group of notorious bandits. To ensure their safety, a police escort would accompany them for the remainder of the journey. One truck would lead the way, its headlights cutting through the darkness, while another followed close behind, bristling with armed officers. The bus began its ascent up a winding mountain road, the kind that seemed to defy gravity. The cliff's edge loomed perilously close, and the nauseating twists and turns made sleep nearly impossible. Yet, exhaustion eventually claimed most of the passengers. The rhythmic hum of the engine became a lullaby, lulling them into uneasy slumber. But the peace was shattered when the bus came to an abrupt halt. Jolted awake, the passengers peered out the windows. Illuminated by the bus's headlights was a series of large rocks, deliberately placed across the road. The scene was eerily quiet, the surrounding darkness oppressive. It was clear this was no accident, but rather a trap. The police sprang into action, their weapons drawn as they scanned the shadows for movement. The passengers sat frozen, their breaths shallow, as the officers worked to clear the road. The tension was suffocating, the weight of what could have happened pressing down on everyone. Had the police not been there, the outcome would have been unthinkable. The bandits' plan was chillingly predictable. The driver would have been forced to disembark and remove the rocks, only to be ambushed. The bandits then would have boarded the bus, with their intentions clear: robbery, violence, and worse. For one passenger, a 17-year-old girl, the thought of what might have happened to her was unbearable. She was of mixed race, but appeared mostly white, a detail that could have made her a prime target for kidnapping, or worse. The isolation of the mountain road offered no hope of escape, no chance of rescue. The police escort had been their salvation, a fragile shield against the darkness that lurked in the wilderness. Even now, years later, the memory of that night lingers, a haunting reminder of how close they had came to the edge of a horrible nightmare. The house sat deep in the canyon, surrounded by twisting roads that wound through the hills like veins. That afternoon had been simple. Two best friends lounging in the safety of the secluded home, indulging in horror films that were more laughable than frightening. The world outside felt distant, irrelevant, until suddenly it wasn't. It started as a whisper of unease, a feeling neither of them could name but both understood instinctively. One moment they were standing at the double sinks in the bathroom, casually getting ready for a night out. The next, they felt the cold grip of dread claw up their spines. The air was different, thick, oppressive. She turned to her friend, her voice unnaturally steady. "We need to leave, right now." Her friend's reaction sent a bolt of ice through her veins. "I know." No hesitation, no questions, just agreement. That was all she needed. They grabbed what they could and ran, out of the house, down the newly paved driveway, their footsteps sharp against the silence. The darkness felt alive, pressing in around them. Their car was parked further down the street. They just needed to reach it. And that's when they saw it. An SUV, stationed dead center in the road with its lights off. They froze. And then, without warning, the headlights flared to life. Horn blared, once, loud, jarring. The vehicle lunged forward, tearing down the road as if someone had been caught, startled into action. They didn't stop running, scrambling down the last stretch of pavement, ruining the pristine driveway as their feet skidded across it. Just as they reached the car, another vehicle pulled up behind them. Her mother. Relief, confusion, terror. They called the police. There was nothing to find. No shattered glass, no broken locks, no trace that anyone had been inside the house. Yet that feeling never left them. The certainty that they had interrupted something. A lookout, a signal. That SUV wasn't random. It was a warning. Whoever had been inside the house had just been alerted. Had they waited even a few more minutes before fleeing, they might have found themselves face to face with something far worse than an empty street. Well, the canyon kept its secrets well, swallowing the truth whole, and whoever had lurked in that house that night stayed unseen. But they both knew deep down that they hadn't imagined it, and they would never know just how close they had come to something much worse. The Wisconsin wilderness is vast and unrelenting. Its dense forests stretch for miles, swallowing up sound, light, and sometimes even people. For a group of high school seniors, a weekend camping trip into its depths promised adventure, laughter, and the kind of carefree escapism only youth allows. Among them was a 17-year-old boy. His father, now much older, would never forget what happened that night. The group arrived at their secluded campsite as the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in streaks of fading gold. Wanting to get the fire going before darkness fully set in, they split off into pairs to gather firewood. The plan was simple: 20 minutes, and then everyone would come back and regroup. Well, the 20 minutes came and went, and most people did return, tossing branches onto the growing pile, except for one pair. At first, the jokes came easily. They were a couple after all, so maybe they had wandered off, lost in the kind of teenage romance that made them forget the passing time. But as an hour slipped by, amusement curdled into something heavier. Unease crept in, gnawing at the edges of their confidence. They set out to search, weaving between trees, calling out their names. But the only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, behind a thick tangle of brush, they found something. Part of the girl's shirt, torn but blood-stained, and the man's shoes, scattered across the ground. The world tilted, and panic took hold. They ran back to their car, back to the fragile illusion of safety. The plan was clear. They would drive the 5 miles to the park ranger's office and report what they had seen. But the moment they reached the vehicle, hope crumbled. The gas tank had been siphoned. Stranded, shaken, they had no choice but to walk. Each step stretched endlessly, their breath sharp in the cold air. Then in the distance, the rumble of a semi-truck approached, its massive frame cutting through the stillness of the night. But as it passed, their eyes locked onto the windows, and what they saw sent shivers up their spine. 2 faces pressed up against the glass. Faces that they recognized. Faces of the missing couple. Wide-eyed, silent, and pleading. But as soon as the truck hit came, it was now gone. And their friends were never seen again. No trace, no answers. Just a lingering memory of that passing truck, and the faces staring back at them, swallowed by the night. The house was quiet that summer, almost unnervingly so. With her mother and brother away visiting colleges, she was left to care for her father, a man whose mind had begun to unravel in ways none of them could fully understand. Parkinson's had taken its toll, but there was something else, something deeper, that seemed to twist his thoughts and emotions. She had thought she could handle it. She had been wrong. Every interaction was a battle. Even the simplest tasks, getting him food, convincing him to sit down, turned into hour-long ordeals filled with shouting and frustration. It wasn't just his stubbornness. It was something darker, something that seemed to simmer beneath the surface, directed entirely at her. That day, the tension reached its breaking point. She called her mother, desperate for help, hoping her father might listen to her voice, even if it came from hundreds of miles away. They argued through the phones, their voices echoing in the same room, separated by only a few feet. Her mother tried to mediate, her voice strained with worry. Finally, her father hung up his phone and handed it to her. Relief washed over her. It's over, she thought. But then he reached for the phone in her hand, and she refused to let go. And that's when it happened. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible. He stood a little straighter, his movements unnaturally calm. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, it felt as though she was staring at someone else entirely. Then, in a voice devoid of emotion, he said, "I'm going to kill you." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was a statement. Cold. Absolute. Her blood ran cold. Her mother's voice broke through the silence, barely a whisper. "Key, run." She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She threw the phone at him, rounded the corner, and grabbed her keys. Her car roared to life, tires screeching as she flew down the driveway. It wasn't rational. It was instinct, pure and primal. When she returned, her father didn't remember what had happened. He was confused, asking why she had left so suddenly, but she couldn't forget. In that moment, she had stared into something buried deep within his broken mind, and whatever it was, it hated her.